Hello students of CSEC English A and B. Well, this one is for students of English B. We'll be looking at a question written on ANANSI. This is an exam type question on the play ANANSI, and I'm just going to show you a sample essay, an essay I wrote answering this question. Now, I would have planned the essay before writing it, but I'll just do a quick summary of how I would have planned. I won't take you through that whole planning process in this video, because I want to make this particular video, let's say 20 to 25 minutes long. So here we have our question. Write an essay in which you describe the relationship between two females in the play. In this essay, you must also discuss how the relationship between two male characters compares to theirs. In one of the relationships described, examine one dramatic technique that can be used to present the nature of the relationship in the play. Alright, so as usual, the question has three distinct parts. Whatever question you get, whether it's prose, poetry, or drama, all of your English B questions for paper 2 will have three parts that you'll need to answer. All right, prose, for poetry, and for drama. Let's look at the three parts of this question. Part 1. Write an essay in which you describe the relationship between two females in the play. That's one thing we'll have to do, and this will take up our first body paragraphs. Now, immediately for me, I just went to girl and woman. So the two females, for me, they're going to be girl and woman. They are very obvious choices, and they have a pretty significant relationship. Now let's see what our second body paragraph will be about. In this essay, you must also discuss how the relationship between two male characters compares to theirs. So what I'll do is I'll definitely be looking at Captain and Boy, right? Captain and Boy. And I won't just be describing Captain and Boy's relationship, but I'll be comparing that relationship to the relationship of girl and woman. So I'll have to describe girl and woman's relationship. I'll do a little bit of description of Captain and Boy's relationship, but more importantly, I'll have to compare that one to this one. Now, the final piece of the question usually asks us to do something, or to discuss some kind of dramatic technique, or in the narrative questions, it would be narrative technique. For poetry, poetic technique. In this case, in one of the relationships described, examine one dramatic technique that can be used to present the nature of the relationship in the play. So for the last body paragraph, I'll choose one of these two relationships, Captain and Boy or girl and woman, and I'll choose the dramatic technique that I think is most effectively used to present that relationship. Now, I think these are both good choices. I could have gone with girl and woman, but I decided to go with boy and captain for the final paragraph here. So for the third body paragraph, I am going to look at captain and boy, and the device I'll use is contrast. I'll examine contrast because captain and boy are pretty much opposites in a lot of different ways. So I think contrast is a very easy device to talk about. So here we have the question kind of broken down. It's a very simple question. Questions, you could get questions that are a bit more complex, questions that have more difficult vocabulary. So this is really a simple example. We're going to look at the relationship between two females. That's going to be girl and woman. Then we're going to look at the relationship between two males. That's going to be captain and boy. And we're going to compare that relationship to the relationship between the two girls, the two women, the two females. And for the final body paragraph, I will talk about how contrast is used to portray the relationship between captain and boy. Alright, so let's start with our first paragraph, which is going to be our intro. Now, you start your essay with a hook, an engaging hook. You want to make sure that your hook is exciting, it's interesting, it's engaging, it raises curiosity, and you want to make sure that your hook is going to lead into your essay itself. So it can't be something that's disconnected from the main points that you will discuss. So this is the hook I decided to work with here. One positive connection can fortify an individual's will such that they are able to overcome the direst of circumstances, whereas a single toxic relationship can debilitate and even wreck the most promising of people. So this hook does a number of things. Let me just highlight the hook in entirety first. First of all, I think this is an interesting opener. It does open up a number of questions in the reader's mind, and the hook actually plays into what the essay is going to be about. So, one positive connection can fortify an individual's will. This is kind of hinting at the connection between girl and woman, right? We know that girl is able to overcome dire circumstances because of her connection, or in part due to her connection to woman. And then I kind of hint that I'm going to talk about a toxic relationship as well. And this one is of course connected to boy and captain. And that ends up being debilitating. Well, it's a little bit exaggerated in the hook perhaps, but the hook is meant to go big, right? You don't want your hook to be so extreme that it doesn't connect to the essay, but you don't want it to be too subtle or too simple. You still want to start with a bang, right? And based on this hook, it's clear that I'm going to be discussing relationships, and not just relationships, but positive and negative relationships, right? So I think that's a good hook. After the hook, I need to get into addressing each piece of the question. So we have this piece in yellow where we have to talk about the females, this piece in blue where we have to talk about the males, the part in red where we talk about contrast and the males. So let's see if we can use these same colors to highlight the different parts of the intro here. In Alistair Campbell's play ANANSI, the female characters, girl and woman, share a formidable bond that helps both of them to navigate the dismal reality of having been forced into bondage. All right, I'm not going to go any further than that. I am just going to leave it right there for the intro. We're not going into details. We're not providing evidence. I am just laying the foundation for what this particular body paragraph will be, right? So I mentioned the two characters, girl and woman. I briefly characterize their relationship, formidable bond, and of course I have to say that it helps them both to navigate blah blah blah. So that's their relationship in a nutshell. I'll provide evidence and stuff like that when I get to paragraph 2. Now let's see if we can touch on this point up here in blue. In contrast, because of course this relationship is kind of the opposite of the one I just described. In contrast, the relationship shared between the male characters, boy and captain, is one of constant misalignment and tension. Yes, I think that's enough for that. And I need to touch on this red section here where I mention how contrast is used to present that relationship. The nature of this relationship is presented primarily through the use of contrast. So these are the 3 parts of your intro when you're writing any of these essays for any of the genres, whether it's poetry, prose, or drama. You want to start with your hook. Your hook should excite the reader and it should connect to the topic at hand. It shouldn't be random. It should really be a powerful and exciting start. After the hook, you mention what will be discussed in the first body paragraph, and that should connect to the first part of the question. Then you do this for the second point, right? You make sure that's covered, and you do this for the last point, which is going to talk about devices or techniques, stuff like that. Usually that's my introduction. Now as we go, I'd like to point out some perhaps interesting vocabulary that we see along the way, words that you might be able to inject into your own essays, words that I think would reflect well on your vocabulary level. So here I would say fortify is a nice word. Yeah, fortify. Overcome might be a nice word. Diarist. Debilitate. Wreck. Maybe wreck is not so exciting. Note how I put ANANSI in quotations. It's the name of the play, not the name of the character, so I use quotes. Note how I mention the playwright's full name, Alistair Campbell. After this, I can just say Campbell. But for now, Alistair Campbell. I'm showing the marker that I know the playwright's name. Let's see, what other nice words have I used? Navigate is a word you can drop into almost any essay. Misalignment, yeah, I think that's a nice one. Yeah. So a couple of nice words thrown in. You don't need to overdo it. Don't use big words for the sake of using big words. Just make sure you're being as accurate as possible with your language. All right. Let's go into the first paragraph where I have to basically outline, describe the relationship between two females, girl and woman. Here we go. Woman and girl meet each other as they are both thrown into the cabin of a slave ship. Immediately, it becomes clear that girl, as one would expect, is afraid and confused. In the play's first act, I put act in quotation marks because the play isn't really strictly divided into acts in the traditional way. So I'm using the division act here, but I'm also making it clear that I know it's not really an act like in the Shakespearean plays where we have acts and scenes. Anyway, in the play's first act, the stage directions mention that girl is, and here I drop in some evidence, crying in the darkness. Woman tells girl not to waste her tears. She then goes on to inspire and strengthen girl with ANANSI stories. So I'm going to make this paragraph yellow since I'm touching on the first point. Right? This is the yellow paragraph. This section here is basically talking about, of course, as you can see, how they met and the relationship they have with each other. And note that I've thrown in a bit of evidence. Some of the evidence would be direct quotes, while some of the evidence wouldn't be direct quotes. A direct quotation, meaning words directly from the text would be here. Crying in the darkness. It's good if you can drop at least a phrase of direct quotation in each paragraph. Yes, that would be good. But if you need to paraphrase, do that. Don't paraphrase and use quotation marks though. Only use these when you're confident that you're actually hitting the words verbatim. Alright, let's see how the rest of this paragraph develops. The two, over the course of the first half of the play, develop an unbreakable bond, with girl eventually even referring to woman as mother. Both characters benefit from this positive relationship. Girl gleans wisdom and courage from woman, who in turn enjoys a sense of purpose and fulfillment as she pours herself into girl. Alright, so I think this is a solid description of the relationship between girl and woman. The question said, describe the relationship. So I've kind of described the relationship on two levels. The first level is, okay, how did they meet and what do they do, right? How do they relate? The second level is kind of more on an analytical level, where what do they gain from each other? How does the relationship help them individually? And I mentioned that in the second part of this paragraph. All right, what do I do next? Next, I need to talk about the relationship between the male characters, boy and captain. So let's get down here. And I'm going to start the paragraph with a little bit of a transition because I'm not really writing 5 separate paragraphs. It's one essay, right? So I'm going to start this paragraph by mentioning the previous one. While girl and woman share a tight familial bond, and the while here suggests that I'm going to be going into a contrasting relationship. Let me jump over to the blue. Boy and captain, even though they're actually father and son, share a discordant and tense relationship. Nice words here, nice words here. Let me get the nice word ink. Discordant, tense. Yeah. The very first scene of the play highlights this. As captain, exasperated by boy's confusion about and compassion for the slaves, scolds and slaps him. So this is all evidence I'm providing. I am providing evidence, even though I'm not quoting words directly from the play. I am still mentioning specific things. I mentioned that this happens in the very first scene, right? I mentioned how Captain feels about boy, about what boy is thinking and expressing, and I mentioned the slap. So I am mentioning specific things. So even if I wasn't able to remember specific words, I am paraphrasing, and I'm kind of telling that story in my own way, while getting into not just what happens, but how it affects characters and how the relationship actually unfolds. And now I'll get into a little bit of direct evidence. The cold formality of the relationship is quickly evidenced in the same scene as captain tells boy, whilst you are on my ship, you'll address me as captain. You will notice the ellipsis here. What this is indicating is that I'm not quoting the entire sentence. I'm leaving some stuff out. I only need this part and this part in my quote. I don't need whatever is missing. Either I couldn't remember it or I don't need it, so I just leave it out. And I create this condensed sentence. Whilst you're on my ship, blah, 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 you'll address me as captain. You can check the actual play to see what was missing. I can't recall. Well, all right. So remember, in the second part, always double check your question to make sure you're not going off track. Double check your plan. Make sure you're planning before you're writing. No. Where this question might trick some students is this blue section here. You don't want to spend it just describing the relationship between the two males as you would have done for part A, because the main thing you have to get into here is comparing this relationship to the one you described previously. So of course you have to describe the relationship first, but then make sure you go into an analytical comparison between the two relationships. So that's what I'm getting into. Know that the relationship is described. So let me use a slightly darker blue to indicate that I'm going a little bit deeper from here. While girl and woman share in each other's thoughts and feelings in a genuine way, captain and boy never show such an intimate connection. So I'm comparing the two relationships, despite being father and son. And I mentioned this twice because it's a very important point, being father and son, because it does highlight an irony. The irony is they're actually blood family, but they're so distant. Whereas girl and woman are not related by blood, but they're so close, right? And that irony makes the contrast between the two relationships even starker. All right, so let's get back to the dark blue. Furthermore, using the transitional words and phrases as I go along, while girl and woman indulge in humor and fantasy as they relate to each other, captain and boy are always at odds with one another, and captain forces their dialogue to be formal, emotionally distant, and even hostile, right? So I describe the relationship between boy and captain, and I go into how that relationship is different from the relationship between woman and girl. All right, where do we go from here? In the exam, you will be making sure that you're double and triple and quadruple checking your plan and your annotated question as you write. So I am maintaining that habit, even though this is already written. Next, I'm going to be examining how contrast is used to present the nature of the relationship of captain and boy. Let's do that. Let's go for red. Captain and boy's relationship is presented to the audience through many points of contrast between them. Now I'll have to support this by giving evidence. This third body paragraph is one that is going to require a lot of evidence. In this way, the two can be seen as each other's character foil. That's a nice piece of vocabulary in literature. Character foil, characters that contrast with each other and that, bring out certain characteristics and values in one another. So by looking at one character, you learn about the other character. So character foil, keep that term in mind. Very nice term. The most obvious contrasts that help to shape their relationship are those of their incompatible personalities and conflicting philosophies. Two important contrasts I just mentioned. Incompatible personality, right? They're quite different, and their personalities cause them to clash quite often. And conflicting philosophies. They have different ways of viewing the world, don't they? So now that I've dropped these points, I'll need to support them by explaining a little bit and giving some specific examples from the text, right? While boy is compassionate towards the slaves and shows an interest in thinking critically about the idea of slavery, captain is ruthless and stern and dares not risk disrupting the status quo by leaning into too many questions about the fallacies of his own morality. And if you've read the play, then you know that I'm spitting facts right here. Captain doesn't really question what's happening. He's a captain. He has to do this. The money must be made. The slaves must work. That's how it is. While boy is quite curious. He's quite confused about what's happening, and he doesn't understand. How can God be a part of this? How can you mention God and then be doing this kind of stuff? What color is God? Yeah, very interesting question from boy. These fundamental differences between the two lead to a strained relationship, which is perfectly described by the player's narration in one of the earlier scenes. And then I have my quotation, my direct quotation. See how two men share such a small space, miles and miles apart. Very important line. In ANANSI and in all the texts, there are going to be some phrases, some lines that are so poignant, so fundamentally important to different themes in the play that it's worth memorizing them, because there's a good chance you might be able to use them, in an essay. So when you find those important questions, important phrases, for example, I mentioned Boy's question, what color is God? I didn't use it here, but that's a question that could come up in a lot of different possible questions on ANANSI. Alright, so the main part is done here. I have my yellow section where I talk about woman and girl. I have my blue section where I talk about captain and boy and compare that to woman and girl. I have my red section where I talk about how contrast is used to discuss the relationship or show the relationship between captain and boy. So now I need to wrap this up by dropping in my conclusion. Now the conclusion is more than just a summary of the essay. The conclusion is going to tie everything together nicely. You won't introduce any new points, but you have to make sure that even if the reader saw these as being separate things, the conclusion will allow them to see the essay as being one coherent piece of writing, right? And then you want to end, just as you start with a bang up here, you want to end with a bang. You want to make sure that your conclusion leads out with a kind of lesson or a kind of fundamental truth or perspective that you would have come away with after writing this essay. So first of all, I'm gonna use these same colors to highlight where these different pieces of the question are reiterated in the conclusion. As one peruses the two aforementioned relationships, it becomes all too clear that the connections people share with others can shape their life experiences and even their worldviews. So this is it sounds like a nice intro to the conclusion, right? It kind of wraps up what we would have learned from the body paragraphs. But now I'm going to get a little bit more specific to do a quick recap of what each body paragraph hammered home. Girl and woman's bond is deep and inspirational, and this impacts their lives, and this impacts the lives of both characters in a positive way. Now I'm going to touch on the opposite side. On the opposite side, boy and captain, even though they seem to be in a much more favorable situation than the female slaves, seem to lead miserable and fruitless lives, as is reflected by their strained and contentious relationship, one which is rife with contrasts, ironies, and ultimately a tragic absence of genuine human connection. So usually I add my nice kind of lesson at the end of the conclusion here, but it's fine having it to start off a conclusion and then wrap up what you would have touched on right after that. So the conclusion and introduction should kind of mirror each other. You have like a big statement here, which, it encapsulates the theme and it's kind of exciting. It goes a little bit out of the confines of the text, and it's kind of your bird's eye view. After delving into the text, this is what I come away with, or this is what I'm going to use to get you interested in what I've learned about the text or what I've learned from the text. And of course, you need to have your 3 points mirroring the 3 points from the question, and then all of this is kind of mirrored at the end where you have those 3 points again, and you have like this nice juicy fundamental lesson or truth which you can use. You can use it to start your conclusion, or you can use it to end your conclusion, to end with a bang. But I think this final sentence was really nice, so I'm fine ending on that note. Yeah, so this is the essay, guys. This is the essay. 5 paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Intro, conclusion, and those bookend 3 nice, concise body paragraphs that each come with pieces of evidence from the text. There isn't like heavy quotation, because being realistic in the exam, you'll not be able to quote line after line after line from the play. Realistically, you will be able to quote maybe a few phrases or words in each paragraph, but even outside of direct quotes, make sure that you're dropping in, paraphrased evidence, and make sure that you're, doing your analysis. It's not a summary that you're writing in the essay. You're writing an analytical essay. So while you will have to do some, brief points of summary, for example, I have to summarize the relationship of these people, but make sure you're analyzing and going into, how something affects someone, how something relates to someone, and just make sure your essay doesn't sound like you're rewriting the text in just 5 paragraphs. Make sure that you're adding your commentary, you're adding your analysis. All right, this is it. And I will allow you to take screenshots of the essay. So I'll just pause here. You can check that out. You can pause and read it if you wish. And then I'll scroll down to the rest, the next 2 paragraphs and the final paragraph, so you can check it out as a whole. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Go to my website, CSECenglish.com. You will see lots of exciting resources for English A and B. Especially if you're a teacher. If you're a teacher, you need to visit this website. Lots of good stuff. All right, that's it for now.